We're going to talk about avoiding data breaches and risk from misconfigurations. It's an area a lot of people tend to overlook and not think about that much. Before we get into that, just to introduce myself, my name is Eric Wing. I'm a senior sales engineer with Trend Micro. My contact information is up there. I've been in this role now for about 2.5 years. Have a lot of experience in working in cloud security and how to configure those, both from a traditional standpoint, people think putting the agents and things on, as well as more in the DevOps space and other things, it comes around cloud configurations and those types of things here as well. Initially, when I found out we're using Zoom, I try to make a lot of my presentations here, especially when they're virtual, be a little more interactive and fun, like using the annotation tools, have people put on their webcams, things like that. So I don't like people to get bored and fall asleep, looking at a bunch of PowerPoint slides. Some of these tools aren't available. I guess we can't do the webcams or annotations, but I highly encourage people, do participate. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. I know there's some moderators looking at that as well, but please, do try to speak up if there's anything you'd like to know. Just to give you a little bit of background about Trend Micro, this is our 32nd year in business. We are a exclusively, cybersecurity company. Our mission statement on day one was making the world safe for the exchange of digital information. That remains our mission statement to this day. Throughout our history, this is one of the things that makes us a little bit unique. We have been profitable every single quarter we've been in business, and we have hundreds of thousands of commercial customers across the globe, and we're literally protecting hundreds of millions of devices and workloads across the world as well. We have right around 7,000 people, employees spread out through the globe, and we're very passionate about what we do. Along that, this is actually a picture of our sales kickoff, which is from earlier this year, when we're still allowed to get together and all that. I'm actually in that picture there someplace. But this is kind of, highlighting again, we do have hundreds of thousands of customers, millions of consumers that we're protecting. But we are a passionate company, especially in these times right now. We do support a lot of charities. We do home building for the poor. We invest a lot in education. We do internet safety for families and children. That's a program I'm involved in, as well as we try to support closing the gap within our industry. So we support a lot of training, try to increase the diversity and inclusion within the security and IT markets as a whole. So with that kind of background there, that's as salesy as I'll get. We'll start talking about why do people need to worry about configuration? I set up my AWS services. There should be secure. Why do I really need to worry about this? Well, if you look at some of the recent reports, including one that came out from Gartner, they said through 2023 that 99% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. So think about that. It means almost every single type of security failure that happens within the cloud is going to be something of the customer's fault, some sort of misconfiguration. In addition, companies that implement a cloud security posture management system, so that's the type of system that actually looks at your configuration to ensure that you're configuring things correctly. If you go ahead and put that in place and make that as part of your development process, you'll actually reduce those cloud-related security instances as much as 80%. So it can have a big impact to incorporate cloud security posture management into how you deploy your cloud. Excuse me. And nearly all successful attacks on cloud services, again, are a result of customers' configuration management mistakes. So that's a direct quote from that report. So it is something you really need to, take a look at. And a lot of people ask, does it really pose a risk? Well, if you think of AWS, and there's been, a lot of presentations going on here today, there's over 170 different services, and new services are being added all the time. And you think about each one of those services, each one has very granular configurations, how they can be configured, how they can be set up. In addition, they all have their own authorization policies, how I control access, to those services. That makes things very, complex, and it can be difficult to ensure that you have things set up as they should be, both from a configuration standpoint and from a compliance standpoint. So when you're asking yourself, is my cloud infrastructure, really configured and deployed securely, it can be a lot more difficult than people realize. There could be some services that you even have in your environment. You may not even be aware that you have different departments or people that might be leveraging. So it is something that you do need to think about when you're deploying different things. So what are some of the top configuration failures? So this was a study that was done. The source of this one's dark reading, as you can see at the bottom here. But these are kind of the top 5, configuration failures that people make. The first being storage access. I set up an S3 bucket, that I don't, put proper controls on it. So, people can, potentially access information, put stuff on there it shouldn't be, whatever it may be. Secrets management. Disabled logging and monitoring, not keeping tracks or tabs on what's going on in my environment. Over permissive access to my host containers or virtual machines, my instances. I'm not really having the controls and things I should have on them. And lastly, a lack of validation. I may think I have all these on here, but I'm not actually validating it in any type of way. So those are the 5 top things that people need to look at. So I've got some examples here, some real world examples of some misconfigurations that have made the news over the past couple of years. Just to kind of highlight, some of the things that misconfigurations can cause. So the first one we'll talk about here, excuse me, will be Imperva. So they had and this is related to their Cloud WAF, product, but they had an internal compute instance that was misconfigured. That misconfiguration, allowed this instance to be publicly accessible. Well, within that instance, they had their AWS API key. Well, if somebody was able to get into that instance and then see what that API key was, that gave them access to a database snapshot. That snapshot contained customer information that could be exfiltrated and then shared. The customer data actually included API keys and SSL certificates from those customers. So this is a case, where we had misconfigured instance. It's probably a bastion box, a jump system of some kind. But unfortunately, it had API key stored in it, and that key did provide access to a database snapshot that had some customer data in it. So it is a misconfiguration that led to that type of thing. Another example, CenturyLink. They had a Mongo database that was misconfigured. Customer records were not protected and were exposed. The result of that was 2.8 million customer records were publicly available. And the interesting thing on this is that exposure was actually out there for 10 months before they discovered it. So this is an example of not validating or monitoring that the types of things. It actually took them 10 months to even realize that misconfiguration was out there. Another example, Uber. Uber had an incident where they had 57 million customers and drivers that were affected. This is a little bit of an interesting case because in this case, the threat actors had access to their AWS credentials. They were able to find credential information it was actually misconfigured GitHub in this case. So they had that information in there. They didn't have anything set up like with multi-factor authentication or any of those type of security controls, so people were able to access the accounts. The interesting thing was on this incident is more how Uber handled this incident. They actually, when they found out about it, they actually bribed the hackers or the threat actors with a $100,000 payment to keep the incident quiet. Needless to say, that did not work. And the end result was they actually were fined and ordered to pay $148 million in connection with that data breach and the cover-up behind it. So, keeping your credentials and your secret secure is important, and also, making sure that you are using proper security controls like multi-factor authentication can be good. And certainly when you do have incidents, you want to be forthright and forthcoming, with them. Another example, Time Warner Cable. They had misconfigured S3 buckets. In this case, it's a simple, it was open to the public. So with that, 4 million customer personal information were exposed to the internet. So just from having 2 misconfigured S3 buckets, 4 million of their customers' personal information was exposed to the internet. Now, in this particular case, there's no evidence or anything that the data was actually used with any type of malicious intent. So when it was brought to their attention, there was nothing malicious found. So this is a case where the data was exposed, but again, there's no evidence that it was used for anything. But still having the news headlines, those types of things, obviously there's the reputation risk that you have in addition, potential risk from using the data. More recently here, within the last week, this is a newer case here, is with Honda. This is one I've been following this last week, and I just actually added this slide not that long ago. If you look at some of the sources, one even came from yesterday. But this is an interesting thing here, where last year they had an unsecured Elasticsearch database. That database allowed threat actors to extract about 40 gigs of internal system and device data, which comprise about 134 million documents. That data could be used to identify soft spots within their network. And what I mean by that is they actually had like their security records in there to identify what security was on what devices, those types of things. There's a lot of internal information within this. Now, just recently, they seem to be suffering a ransomware attack, the Snake ransomware, which specifically targets like ICS and SCADA devices. And it appears that the threat actors, very much targeted them using the information from that original data breach from last year through the database misconfiguration. So this is a case where that misconfiguration, allowed information to potentially get out there. And then they use that information to be able to launch a successful attack. This is something that's still developing. I'm sure there'll be more news coming out on that, but it is an example of how even a breach, from about a year ago can come back and haunt you, later. So those are just some real-world examples, to think about. One thing I wanted to talk about here next is the different services with AWS, and kind of what you need to look at. For some of them. So this is one of the things that's going to hopefully people to annotate. Maybe we can use the chat here a little bit. But what services are people using? I've got a few examples up here. I do see I just brought the chat up, and I do see that a couple of people noticed I was wearing my Indians hat there. So yeah, I am based in Cleveland, Ohio. So I do have that. But is there any? These are the kind of the three we're going to talk about in this. I got EC2, S3, Lambda. Mentioned Elasticsearch is one of the ones that's misconfigured in the case of Honda. But if there's anything particular, go ahead and let me know. But again, a lot of people do think that, I do have, protection, but there's that shared responsibility, model, which I won't, go into too much. This picture here is obviously straight from AWS, but it talks more about some of the services you don't always think about. Like Lambda, Fargate, EKS is in here. And, AWS does provide a secure foundation for you to build, all your services on. So like an EC2, the physical hardware, the facilities and things that all that's running on, AWS is ensuring that that's secure. But, what you run on that, is still going to be under your responsibility, whether it be your code, the database configurations, whatever it may be that you're running on those EC2 instances. If you look at like EKS, it's the same thing. They're going to provide you, again, physical infrastructure, that is secure, on that. But the code that you run within that, how you configure, your integrations, your security configurations, those types of things are going to fall, again, upon you to make sure they're secure. And same thing like with Fargate or, even Lambda, Lambda, which is completely serverless, you're still executing code, within Lambda. So you got to make sure that the code is secure, that somehow the code's not exposed, that there's not different things going on. So it's always still a shared responsibility that you have, even when you're talking about moving things, more into the serverless space here as well. So how can I be sure that I am configuring things, that are secure within my AWS environment? Oops, I seem to have lost my clicker here. Oops, there we go. The easiest way to do that is there's the AWS well-architected framework. And what the well-architected framework is, it checks your architecture to make sure it's aligned to AWS best practices. And really what you want to do is be able to, automate, the collection of your, data, your information to ensure that you are operating, according to those best practices. And the well-architected framework, goes across 5 different pillars, which you can see down here at the bottom. You have your security, reliability, performance, cost, and operational excellence. We're primarily focused on the security one here in our lecture today. But it does cover all of those. You want to make sure that every service you deploy, is secure, it's reliable, it's performing efficiently. You don't have any lag or anything. You want to make sure that you're overspending, for resources or services you're not using. And of course, you want to make sure your operational excellence is also good. You're not having to spend a lot of resources and other things, in maintaining the operation, of those services. So keeping, a well-architected framework in mind, if I looked at a EC2 instance, what are some of the things, I should be checking? And this was, again, where I, was hoping that we could annotate, do some different things here. But what are some of the things you think that you might want to be able to check? And I'll keep an eye here on the chat. I don't really have much of a way to put in here. But if anybody says anything, I'll be certainly do it. But let me go ahead and I'll bring up what the rules are around the AWS well-architected framework. Obviously, I'm not going to cover each one of these, but you can get an idea, on here. What are some of the things that you need to look at? Want to make sure I'm not using outdated AMIs. Over here, I want to make sure that I'm not providing unrestricted access to different services. I want to make sure that things are being deployed in a secure fashion. You also want to make sure you can see, like here in the middle of this one, I don't have an idle EC2 instance. That could be a cost, example there. I will mention that each one of these, you can kind of see that these are hyperlinked. If you can see my finger here, I did make the slides available. If you click on any of these, it will pull up I'll show you here real quick. It will pull up our knowledge base and show you, what the risk level is, what the actual rule is, and I'll actually walk you through both the console access and the CLI, interface of how you can, correct those, and that's true of any of the rules that are on here. So that's something, if you do get the slides, you can do that, and I'd be more than happy to share them with you as well too. So these are the different things according to the AWS well-architected framework that I need to look at for an EC2 instance. Somebody did mention on here security group access. It's absolutely something, and you can see that you do have your security group things right here. So you want to make sure that you do, control that information. Gave the example of Imperva, that was an EC2 instance they had misconfigured, where that API keys, are stored in there, that people were be able to get a hold of. What about an S3, storage bucket? What are some of the things maybe I need to look at for there before I jump over to what the actual rule set is? Yeah, does it have public access? That is a biggie. So, the one example I gave, had the 2 S3 buckets of public access, and there's data. There was customer data on those. So here's the rules for the S3 buckets. So again, my access control, you can see here, may have to have encryption. A lot of these are going to be around control access, but I want to ensure that my basic rules of thumb, for storage is going to be, I want to make sure that I'm providing access to that storage only to the services and people, that should have it. And I also want to make sure that, things are encrypted as well too, so people aren't able to access, things, and maybe, sniffing the transmission, whatever it may be, as well too. So these are the different rules, from S3 storage buckets. Don't know if anybody uses EKS or not. That's the Elastic Kubernetes service, but this is very popular, within containers. So I have to have my orchestration. But here you can see there's not as many rules as like an EC2 or S3. But again, I want to make sure my security groups are configured. So a multi-line traffic, over port 443, which I want to make sure my logging is set up as it should be. Again, if I need to monitor and track things, it's very important that I have logging set up. The versions of different things running, configuration changes. Again, I want to monitor, that type of stuff. So in addition to the security things I have to set up, I always want to make sure that I'm monitoring and logging enabled as well too. Because as changes occur, I want to make sure I document those, and it also gives me the ability to, troubleshoot and look at things as well. Is anybody using Lambda then? So I'm starting to get customer inquiries, on different Lambda services now. Just looking at the chat here. I know there can be some delays sometimes. So, there we go. So there's somebody raised their hand. Figured there'd probably be a couple people. A lot of people think that Lambda by default, since it's completely serverless, is completely secure. And obviously, as you can see, the list is not as great. Again, it's like EC2 or S3. But you don't want to make sure that your Lambda functions aren't exposed, to people. You want to make sure that you don't have cross-account access. You want to make sure that you're controlling the admin privileges. Also want to make sure that even things like transmission of your functions is encrypted, so people can't sniff that information. The code itself, you want to make sure the secrets aren't, whatever it may be, you want to do that. So it is something that you need to look out for. So those are the kind of rules for that. So if somebody said that VPC attached or public accessible, yes, that would want to make sure you have all those things configured correctly. So let's talk about posture management, what you should look for when you're evaluating a posture management system. So I want to make sure that I have things configured properly within my AWS environment. What are some of the things that I should look for? Because there are a few of them out there. One of the keys is real-time visibility into my security, compliance, and governance vulnerabilities of my infrastructure. Because I need to have that visibility. Is my DevOps teams and other teams are releasing services out there, and they're building building and leveraging new AWS services. I may not know if I'm the one that's supposed to making sure that I'm being compliant to different things that's out there. I need to have that visibility to actually see that's going on. That's very important. I should have step-by-step remediation guides. If issues are found that I'm not complying to something, I'm not complying to the AWS well-architected framework, or something else I need to be complying to, how do I remediate that? Having those step-by-step remediation guides could help. So, I kind of showed the example. We provide that, both from the console standpoint and the CLI standpoint. And then also, automated approach. So I have continuous assurance. So again, I want to have that real-time, capability. I don't want it to be something that I have to run manually, from time to time. I want it to be automated, so I can have that continuous. I want to make sure that it allows me to be compliant, the different standards I need to. This is just showing a handful here, but I need to make sure that everything that I'm doing gives me that continuous assurance against whatever standards I have to follow. So if I, have to, follow NIST, or if I have to follow HIPAA, whatever regulatory things I'm under, PCI, I need to ensure that all the services I'm providing are adhering to those compliance regulations. So I can certainly do that. The well-architected, framework. There's currently over 600 different things, that they're made up, within that. I want to make sure whatever I'm looking at has a one-to-one relationship, with that. Having a posture management system that maybe does half of those is not going to give me as full picture as of one that does, all of them. So I need to make sure that, I have checks that are going to run against the entire AWS well-architected framework, and then also provide me that step-by-step, remediation. want to make sure that things are natively integrated. So, it's actually leveraging, um, things within AWS itself. It's not a separate piece of hardware or something that's external, to AWS. It's actually a part of the system. So this is just showing an example here how, the AWS accounts, come in, and this is the architecture that we use. We're going to leverage Lambda, for everything, and our dashboards, our reports, our configurations, everything, all come through this collection, which is all through Lambda calls and everything. If you do API calls, in, it comes in here. So it's a native, integration. There isn't anything external about it. I typically want to make sure that I can do things via API. So it allows me to integrate, things more live into my accounts. So as I orchestrate things, or, have different things, if I can make those API calls, it makes it a lot easier for me to ensure that I am doing, things, correctly. I don't have to go into a console or other things, to do those functions. I can just simply, bake it into the rest of the code that I'm doing, or I can treat it the same, as everything else I'm doing. Kind of in that same vein, what if I'm using CloudFormation templates? So I have a CloudFormation template, is, to ship everything, left, as everybody adopts the DevOps mentality. How can I ensure that I'm compliant and meeting these things even prior to deployment? Well, I can scan my CloudFormation template, and that scan is going to tell me, yes, this is going to build a compliant, service, or, the infrastructure that's building is compliant, whatever different checks it is that I'm looking for. So I can actually ensure that something is compliant prior to it being deployed, which is a very powerful, feature I want to make sure that I can do. The real-time, threat monitoring, again, I want to be able to receive, alerts and remediation to ensure that everything that I'm doing is secure and reliable and optimized, all the time. And what I mean by that is let's say that somebody created a new S3 bucket, but they didn't encrypt it, or, it's publicly accessible. Those are two, easy things that most people, it can understand. I need to be alerted to that immediately, and also have, be able to take remediation actions on that. As my services and configurations and stuff change, I want to be sure that if something is set up in a non-compliant fashion, I can go ahead and, be alerted on that. Excuse me. Auto remediation, as part of that. Again, the example I just gave, let's say somebody set up a, S3 bucket. What if, I could go ahead and do an auto remediation on it, where it's going to go ahead and automatically encrypt it, or maybe it's going to automatically remove the public access to it. Whatever, it is, I can set up the auto remediation rules as well too. So if a failure is found, I can go ahead and remediate against that without having any user intervention whatsoever, potentially. Monitoring, user activity is also, but to who initiated the unwanted event, and that allows me to stop and remediate those threats at the source. People don't intentionally do things that are out of compliance, or unsecure. So being able to identify where these things come from allows me to go ahead and address how that happened, whether it be a particular piece of code, some action somebody took, whatever it may be. Having that monitoring allows me to go ahead and address things at the source, rather than having to kind of backtrack that. The workflow integration is very important. Most organizations are using a variety of tools. This is just some that are up here. Slack and Jira are very, very, very popular. But something that if I find an issue, I can go ahead and I can open up that service ticket, make that alert, whatever it may be, and then allow them to close it out, or even part of the auto remediation, it goes ahead and close it out. Once it remediates, what that is. But having that integration is very important, because again, I'm going to tie directly in to what my current operations show me. Excuse me. So that's something else I want to make sure that I have. And then I also wanted to point out, we do have on our website, and I'll put this if you go to our, I believe we have a Slack channel for our sponsorship. I'll put this link in there as well. There is a report we have available. It's both online and there's a PDF version available of it, available at this link here that goes into a lot more of the common threats that you can find within cloud security. You can go ahead and take a look at. I wanted to keep this presentation to about a half hour or so because I want to make sure people had a chance to ask questions or those types of things. So that brings us to the end. It took a little bit less time than I thought. I thought it'd take about 35 minutes or so. It took about 31, it looks like. But again, here's my contact information. I don't know if there's any questions people had or anything like that, but I appreciate you guys listening to me. Hopefully it was helpful. I don't know if we had any questions or not.
Yeah, nothing so far.
Okay.
We'll keep an eye on the chat. I wanted to chime in there too that for people that didn't see this the other day, Slack and AWS just announced a partnership. You had mentioned Slack is one of the tools. Okay,
yeah, it's one of the ones that integrate, with for sure. So, and then also, like I said, I'll hang out in our partner Slack channel as well. For our sponsorship, we have one as well. So if anybody has any questions, and then there's my email and stuff as well too.
Great. We do have a question here from Adam. He said, what services are insecure by default?
Just about any service can be insecure by default, depending on what you're doing. So it's hard to say. The most common ones that people don't configure is usually like the S3 bucket. That's usually the ones that, people, because there's usually a purpose that's being set up for. People say, well, it shouldn't be publicly accessible. Well, you may want it publicly accessible because maybe you have people uploading things. Maybe ensuring that the data that's in there that is publicly accessible is what data it should be. It just depends. But almost any service that you have to look at what's going on there. The API keys, in particular, the secret management, is key too. So it's a difficult one, but it's something you should always be evaluating.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? Please put those in the chat or the Q&A for Eric.
I was worried about running over. We ran a little bit short. So that's what happened when the annotations didn't.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. So I was trying to do different things. So key thing is just these are things that people don't always think about. So hopefully think about it. But yeah, with that, I guess you guys can have a few minute break.